Hello people, so today I want to talk about character in One Piece. I've been seeing this topic floating around the community recently, and there was also an Oda interview that was published not too long ago where he talks about character. He also talks briefly about his relationship with Kishimoto, and so I figured, why not? Let's do this. But the first thing that we need to address is this, okay? When it comes to writing stories, a bunch of people that are well-versed when it comes to writing, the experts if you will, most of them tend to agree that there's two categories that drive a story forward. First one is a character-driven story, and the second one is a plot-driven story. And the way you can tell the difference between each of the categories is by looking at what seems to be more fleshed out within the story that you're reading. Are the characters more fleshed out? Are they more detailed? Are they more well-developed? Okay. If that's the case, that's usually leaning towards a character-driven story. If the events are more developed, if they have more detail, okay, if there seems to be more depth to the events of the story as a whole, that's a plot-driven story. Now, nothing that you read or watch is ever going to be 100% character-driven, nor 100% plot-driven. In fact, ideally, a good writer knows how to balance these two categories and offer you a balance between the two to the point where you kind of get the feeling that it's both moving forward as you read the story. A pretty good example of a series that does a pretty good job at balancing both character and plot together is something like Game of Thrones. In Game of Thrones, you have a very shocking sequence of events that start happening one after the other. Just from the very first episode, it's like this line of dominoes that start collapsing one after the other very, very quickly. Yet at the same time, if you follow that thread, that narrative line, you also see that the characters are constantly being pushed. They're constantly forced to make choices. They're constantly thinking about what to do next, how to develop, and they change. So you have this, again, this very shocking sequence of events, but throughout that, you have a lot of character growth and development. And the beauty about this balance happening in fiction is that that's usually what happens in real life as well. Things happen to you, sometimes you cause things to happen, and you grow and you learn because of them. And so, your essence, for the most part, stays the same, but there are things that you learn that you weren't aware about before that influence the choices that you make moving forward. And so that's why I think it's a pretty good example of being able to balance out the plot-driven aspect with the character-driven aspect. That's Game of Thrones. Okay, so what is a character-driven narrative? I'll give you an example. Naruto Shippuden is a really good example of something that is character-driven. In the very first episode, you get to know Naruto, you tend to empathize with his character, and you get introduced to a bunch of other different characters like Naruto's classmates, the rest of the shinobi from the village, and even the Akatsuki, who for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, they seem pretty well fleshed out as characters. I mean, there's even an entire arc in Shippuden dedicated to Shikamaru's character development and growth, when he's grieving over Asuma. But when you look at the structure, and especially of part 2, it's just remarkably obvious that Kishimoto is making a very clear effort to develop both Naruto and Sasuke simultaneously. Like back to back, it's like this ebb and flow, the yin and yang. You see Naruto and Sasuke's growth parallel each other in part 2. So you constantly are getting exposed to their character growth and development, the choices that they make, the conflicts that they're confronted with, especially internally. And so if you follow that character thread, ultimately what that leads you to is that emotional fight, that emotional clash at the Valley of the End. Even like the shippings are also about character because people are so invested in this romantic aspect of the characters' lives. So Naruto Shippuden to me is a great example of something that's character driven. Another example of this, and I can tell easily just from the first couple of episodes that this is what this type of story it is that My Hero Academia is also very heavily character oriented. It's character driven. Okay, so now what's an example of something that tends to be plot driven? Or some type of a story that leans more heavily towards being plot-driven? Well, to me, and I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of examples out there, you can probably come up with your own, but to me, a pretty good example of something that's plot-driven is something like Finding Nemo. Aside from Marlin, who is Nemo's dad, who actually kind of gets like a sort of like a small character arc where he kind of learns to be less anxious, less overprotective. He kind of lets go of Nemo a little bit by the end of the story. The rest of the cast pretty much stays the same throughout the entire thing. Dory and Nemo don't change. The rest of the cast doesn't change. And the focus of the film is primarily on the events, on this sequence of events that happens to try and get Nemo back. They run into some sharks, then things explode, and they have to go even deeper, and they find this fish monster with a lantern or something, and then they're swimming with some jellyfish, and then they find some turtles in this current, and then they get swallowed by a whale, and then meanwhile there's a bunch of other things going on in that fish tank because the fish want to escape. Okay, so it's like boom, 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 sequence of events. Meanwhile, you're also being exposed to these very vast, very beautiful looking, detailed settings underwater. And so that's part of the experience of the film, of the story. So that's what something that's leaning towards being plot driven looks like. And again, nothing is ever going to be 100% exclusively character driven or 100% exclusively plot driven. But if you pay close attention to the story that you're reading, you begin to notice a tendency from the writer in terms of them leaning heavily more towards one side than the other. Their preference in terms of how they want to tell the story, if you will. So let me ask you this. Is One Piece more character-driven or more plot-driven? It's plot-driven. Anybody who says that One Piece is a character-driven story is just flat out wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you. We are currently 900 chapters plus into this story, and out of those 900 chapters, there's only been 5 main character arcs in this story, and only 4 of them have been done well. Notice that I'm saying main character arcs, okay? So these are arcs that are from the main cast, all right? The first character arc that we get is Nami's, that ends in Arlong Park. The second one is, well, we get one for Usopp, one for Robin, and they both start in Water 7, and they both culminate at Enies Lobby, or at the end of Enies Lobby. The third arc is Luffy's, and that starts by the end of Subodi Archipelago, and it ends at the end of Marineford. Or actually, I think it ends even a little bit beyond that with the Sabo flashback, okay? And then the fifth arc is Sanji's in Whole Cake Island. There are some secondary arcs here and there, spread out throughout like different islands, different arcs, but these are the 5. And you can tell that these are the main 5 because, again, each of these characters learned something by the end of each of their respective arcs that they didn't know before. Something is brought to their awareness that they were previously unaware of. In Nami's case is that she was fooling herself into believing that money was going to be the solution to her problems, when in fact she was technically dealing with an abuser, somebody who was keeping her hostage there, somebody who was like, going against her own will, her own freedom. So she needed to learn to be genuine about that and ask Luffy for help. And then you see this change. She's a little bit greedy still, but that's kind of like used as a gag. At her core, I think she understands that money is not that big of a deal. I think you see different examples of that throughout the series. An example of this is in Skypiea, when she actually confronts Eneru and tells him, "What good is treasure if I'm all alone?" And then she goes on to say, after sharing so much of our dreams, instead of sacrificing them and leaving with you, because Eneru, I think, was offering her the opportunity to just, be spared, she says, "I would rather just have nothing at all, have no treasure whatsoever if I don't have my friends." Usopp's arc is about him feeling inferior to the rest of the crew. He fears that he's going to be abandoned because he's not at the same level strength-wise as the Monster Trio, for example, to the point where he actually challenges Luffy to a duel. And I just want to highlight how important that is for Usopp's character, especially when you consider his journey to becoming a great, the brave warrior of the sea that he's always wanted to be. And this is a quote from J.K. Rowling, from Dumbledore, from the Harry Potter series. And I think it's very true, especially when you apply it to Usopp's situation. It says, "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to your enemies, but a great deal more to stand up to your friends." So his character arc ends with him learning that even though he's not the strongest member of the crew, he's still an incredibly valuable component of it, and he can help, and he can do the best he can, to try and help Luffy become king of the pirates. And there are things that only he can do within the crew that nobody else can. And this is exemplified very, very clearly in Dressrosa, where he actually saves Luffy from Sugar, and he goes on to make this impossible shot. But before he does so, he says something like "Luffy, just seeing the sea without you, that's not the adventure that I want to go on. Whereas before, he was literally willing to leave the crew. So that's what he's learned. And he also says something like, support is glory. And that's him realizing that that's the role that he has in the crew, and that's where he can shine the most, and he's okay with that now. Then we have Robin, and Robin's character arc is actually very, very similar to that of Sanji's, to the point where I think Sanji's arc in Whole Cake Island suffers because it's just so similar to that of Robin, because it almost feels like Oda is rehashing the same concept, just doing it a little bit more cheaply in Whole Cake Island. So essentially, we got two characters, Robin and Sanji, who have both been conditioned from a very young age to believe that they're less than. Robin believed that she was a curse, and Sanji believed that he was an unworthy burden of a son. Okay, but even the resolution of these character arcs is very similar, because it kind of ends with them, like Luffy even tells him, like, say what you really want to say. Just tell me the truth. And Robin says, I want to live, I want to go out to sea with you. And Sanji says like a variation of that, like, I want to go back to the sunny. And so it's really about both of them learning to stand up for themselves and for what they really want, as opposed to doing what they feel obligated to do because they're feeling threatened. Okay, and that's kind of like their character arc. The only thing is that when it comes to Robin, we've actually seen that this is a lesson that she learned, because there's a scene in Zou where Nekomamushi tells her, like, aren't you scared that, I'm actually worried for you that people are going to try and get you because you're like literally the only person that can read the poneglyphs. And she says, well, I have friends that'll take care of that. I got friends that have my back. So that's what she learned from Enies Lobby. And to the same effect, there's also the scene in Water 7 by the end of the Enies Lobby arc where she's talking to Aokiji, and Aokiji actually asks her, I'm actually surprised, like, why did you sacrifice yourself for them this time? Like, you usually end up running away. And she says it's because it was different this time. These people, she finally realizes that these people are her family, and that she can feel safe with them, and that she doesn't have to run away anymore, that she can trust them. Now, when it comes to Sanji, I'm still a little bit unclear. I'm still a little bit foggy about what he actually ended up learning from his Whole Cake Island experience. There's a part of me, and I'll be honest, there's a part of me that thinks, when it comes to Sanji, like, what was the point of that? But my hope is that we get to learn what he learned, what he became aware of once we see him shine in Wano. And my gut tells me that it'll have something to do with him using the raid suit, or coming to terms with, using that and just embracing that part of his past, and saying, like, even though I don't agree with the type of people that they are, I'm going to be using this tool, this raid suit that they left with me. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to use it to the benefit of others, to help my friends. So it's kind of like, when it comes to your biological family, like you notice that your family isn't perfect. And, as you grow older, hopefully you learn to accept the negatives that you got from your family, or that you were exposed to from your family. But at the same time, you also learn to embrace the positives. Then we have Luffy's arc, which deals with loss and failure. And again, in my opinion, his character arc starts by the end of Sabaody, where he loses his crew. Kuma forces him to be separated from them, and he realizes that he is not strong enough to keep, like, not even one. Like, he can't even save a single friend from being sent away. Then after that, he goes on this journey, this very difficult journey. He goes to Amazon Lily first, then he literally and figuratively goes to hell and back, because he has to go down to the deepest level of Impel Down. He has to go down first, and he has to come back up again. And he gets poisoned, and he's about to die. He has to be injected with these hormones that will, allow him to live, but also take away part of his lifespan. And he keeps going. He's like super exhausted. It's a very arduous, lengthy marathon. And then he goes to Marineford. There's a bunch of top tiers there that just take turns, like, smacking him around and stuff. And so it's a very, very, very clear example of somebody struggling. And then by the end, when Ace gets free, and you begin to think that all this blood, sweat, and tears was actually worth it, and you're going to get a happy ending, and the rescue was actually successful, Ace dies right in front of him. So all these things that Luffy went through, and he had to endure, when you look at the result of the end of the Marineford arc, it's like, this is probably the most cruel thing that could happen to Luffy. So this is a great example of Oda really pushing Luffy's optimism into a corner and saying, okay, I need to push you because you need to evolve. You need to really show what you're made of. It's arguably the darkest time of Luffy's life. And then that triggers a flashback to the second darkest time in Luffy's life, which is when he lost Sabo. And eventually he does come out of this dark pit, and what he realizes, what he learns is that, you know, it takes more than will. It takes more than yelling and being determined and saying that he's going to be king of the pirates to actually become king of the pirates. He needs to take time to train and become stronger than what he is. He needs time to grow. And then I also think that he learns that sometimes, no matter how hard you try and how much you want to, you can't save everybody. Doesn't matter if you're the main character of a story, loss and failure are a part of life, a normal part of life. And there's a really bad line in the anime, in the Fishman Island arc, where Luffy's about to use Red Hawk. And I understand why they had him say this, is just to sort of hype up the scene. And again, it's the anime, so they have to extend things. But he literally says, like, I'll never let anyone die again. And that's, like, to me, that just goes against everything that he learned, you know, before the time skip. But that's just the anime. I checked the manga, and the manga actually, he never says that in the manga. So I'm glad that Oda's keeping that consistent, but the anime just kind of butchered that. That's what we call character regression, okay, where he's like saying things that just make no sense in accordance to what he's learned. And so those are the 5 main character arcs of the story of One Piece. And I feel like at this point, like after all that, you're probably thinking to yourself, wait, after all those examples, you still think that One Piece is plot driven? And the answer is absolutely. In fact, just the notion that I had to explain to you what those 5 arcs were supports the idea that it's plot driven. Just look at what people are invested in. In fact, the most popular arc of the New World thus far, at least according to the reviews and the reactions, has been the Reverie. The Reverie is no character. The Reverie is it's all plot driven. It's like, this is what's going to happen, this is what we're going to discuss, this is what this means for the story moving forward. And that's plot. Because even if you take some of the supporting characters, some of the secondary characters that we ended up really, really liking, you know, throughout these arcs, such as Senor Pink and Katakuri. I'll take Senor Pink for this example. Like somebody like Senor Pink. He's very fleshed out. He has a great backstory. He has a great character moment. Okay. But the only reason we learn about him is because Frankie has to defeat him, because the Doflamingo family has to be defeated so that we can move on to the next thing. And so his character moment, as brilliant as it was, when you look at the big picture, it's all in service of moving the plot forward. It's the same thing with Katakuri. He needed to be defeated. Why? So that the Straw Hats could escape Whole Cake Island. So again, great character moments, but they're all in service of moving on to the next big thing, on to the next event. We even have this scene in Zou from Zoro where he's breaking down the chain of events, the domino effect. It's actually kind of funny because he kind of breaks the fourth wall in a way. He like says, hey reader, you know, in case you haven't noticed, this is the plot. He says, we took down Caesar first, then after Caesar we had to take down Doflamingo, and now after Doflamingo we're up against Kaido. So again, it's like that chain, boom, 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 boom. We're aboard this unstoppable train. That is the plot. So does that mean that Oda is not capable of writing well-developed, fleshed out characters that grow in real time? Notice that I'm saying in real time, right? I'm not counting the flashbacks, because flashbacks are backstory. They're in the past. We're talking about progression real time in the story, as the story unfolds. Does it mean that Oda can't do that? That he can't create those types of characters? Well, he was definitely told something along those lines back in the day. There was a Jump interview that hit the web recently, shout out to Read On from AP Forums, where Oda says that his editors used to tell him that his work had no character. And so Oda said that he didn't understand what they meant. That back in the day, he only thought that what he needed to be successful was a story and drawings, and that was it. No character, just a story and drawings. And so that quote right there lets you know that from the very beginning, okay, Oda's natural tendency is to not be character driven. But then he goes on to say that he's actually learned what they meant, and now for him, writing character is about what a character will do in a certain situation. And I would add that typically, when it comes to writing character is about what a character will do once they're pushed out of their comfort zone. And so he gives an example of this. He says, so writing character is about knowing how a character would react in a given situation. So for example, imagine a giant piece of meat falls from the sky. So I know that Luffy would try and eat it. I know that Zoro would try and slash it, and Nami would probably just watch it fall and ignore it, not think too much of it. And then me as a reader, I would add on, because I know the characters so well, you would add on like Usopp would probably make up a lie about it, or Sanji would try and cook it. Robin would probably try and examine it to see if there's anything written on it. Stuff like that. And so Oda explains that the reason for why he continues to have Luffy do Luffy things, that's how he says it, Luffy things, which is another way of saying the reason for why I try and keep the characters as consistent as possible without pushing their boundaries too much, is because he feels that if he changes a certain aspect of them, that the fans will say, whoa, that's out of character. So he feels he has to be very careful about how he handles his characters. The thing is, though, is that, okay, is he being maybe a little bit too careful? Like take somebody like Zoro, for example. Like, Zoro hasn't been pushed at all ever since they entered the New World, whereas Sanji has been, like, pushed way too much. And so it's very clear that Oda's strength, Oda's strong point, isn't character. And maybe it's not so much that that's not his strength. I think it's more about him being more interested, more focused, more passionate about other things, like the world building, like the plot, like, you know, setting up mysteries, foreshadowing things. I think that's his bread and butter. That's what he likes to do. And you know what? That's okay. Because when I read One Piece, like, to me, One Piece is the narrative equivalent of The Legend of Zelda, for example. Like, Ocarina of Time is my favorite game of all time, right? That is an amazing game. But when I play it, like, I don't necessarily play it because I want to see Link develop. I think Link is an okay guy. I think he's likable enough. But what I really want to do when I play Zelda is go to these temples, explore the world, gain new abilities, solve new mysteries, find items that lead me to other things, you know, become stronger as I defeat these temples. You know, each island, if you think about it, is like a temple in Legend of Zelda. Go up against these bosses and take them down. That right there, in addition to the fact that the characters are likable and at some points do end up surprising you, I just gave you some examples, sometimes they do end up surprising you, that's what I get out of One Piece, and I honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way. And there's this whole part in the interview where Oda talks about his connection with Kishimoto and how he feels that he's the only one that he can relate to because they both know what it's like to be incredibly successful and have like this ongoing series in Jump. And so he says that sometimes he calls him up to vent, and I can just imagine. Well, he also says that Kishimoto is really enjoying life after Naruto. So I kind of get the impression that Kishimoto has mentally checked out. Like, he's made so much money, he's probably up in a mountain somewhere, soaking it up in like a hot spring. And then Oda calls him up with his complaints about fans. And then Oda admits to something that I had intuitively figured out after I read an interview with Oda and Kishimoto together a long time ago. And that's the fact that he says that out of the two of them, Kishimoto is the nicer one. Whereas Oda can sometimes be kind of a dick. He even says that, you know, I sometimes take advantage of Kishimoto's niceness. So it's kind of cool that they still talk to each other because, in a way, I think they complement each other in the sense that Oda's kind of a dick, Kishimoto's a little bit too nice, but also, like I said, Kishimoto is really good at writing character. When it comes to plot, I think Kishimoto is average, but he's really good at writing character. Whereas Oda is really, really good at writing plot and average at writing character. That's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching this entire thing. If you did, like it if you appreciated some of the points that I brought up. Comment down below with your thoughts, and subscribe to my channel for more One Piece related content. I'll catch you later. Bye.